Okay, I started the recording for this meeting, and we'll call the Governor's UAS Council to order here on the 19th of August. I'll do roll call first. Butch Hughesby. Don't have him yet.
I'm here, Craig. Can you hear me?
Yeah, oh, there you are. Okay, great. Dan Olson. I see you're present. JD Jacoby.
Yeah, present, sorry.
JD. Oh, he told me he wasn't going to be able to make it, I think. No, that was Paul. We'll see if JD joins. Paul, or Dustin Temple. Gordy Kahn.
I'm here.
James Strait.
Here.
Jason Smith. Jen Fowler.
Here.
Mike Balzman.
Here, and Craig, I want to just welcome Dwayne Cayley, who's on here. He's MDT's chief engineer, and he's going to share a little bit about our UAS program at MDT. Thanks for joining us, Dwayne.
Welcome, Dwayne.
Welcome, thanks.
Just make a note of that. Paul Suzanne-Paniak. I'll have to learn how to pronounce that correctly, but he told me he's not going to be here. Steve White.
Here.
Wes don't see him yet. And myself. All right. All right, so the plan for today is we're going to touch base on the procurement process and any updates there. And then we'll move into a discussion on the MUAS plan and centralized oversight. Mike has brought in Dwayne to chat with us a bit about what we discussed at the last meeting, about what that would look like for a single agency to have response. And we could discuss some different pros and cons of different options on that. I put together a short list for that, which we can discuss at that time. So I'm going to turn to Gordy, Mike, James, Steve, folks on the procurement. Do we have any more information, updates, or data there to share?
Yeah, I just updated some information on so if you go to our channel under files, cost benefit analysis discussion, that document. I added some stuff to the second page. If that's the direction you guys want to go, I'll give you a minute to get there. Or
Where is it at again?
so you go under the teams. What is it called? A channel where it says procurement, I think.
Procurement.
Procurement. Okay.
And then it's under files. And it's cost benefit analysis discussion.
Gordy, do you want to share your screen of that document? Or
Well, I'm trying, and I'm not doing well at it. Let me try again here. I must have picked the wrong window.
Yeah, I've got it.
Is that sharing? I'm not sharing it.
No, I've got it on the Teams thing.
There, did that share?
Yep.
I got it.
So what I just added was some cost analysis. So there's Gallatin County, but what I kind of did was take the state procurement, and I just took and put their levels of what they require for different procurement methods. And then I just thought, you know, under 50,000, it could be a simple cost benefit analysis is what we might require. But then if you go services over 25,000, you'd want to do the cost benefit analysis plus probably a project plan and a contract plan. So once you're getting into services, the risk gets a little higher. So these are just some ideas I threw out there for you guys to provide input on.
Yeah, looks good.
And then I threw together a simple risk because that's another part of the equation. What I tried to do is just say, you know, if probability is high and the impact is high, that's red. So for simple procurement, you could easily do 2 or 3 risks and figure out where you're at if you need to do any risk mitigation planning. But definitely when you get into higher cost or the services or the higher risk, you want to get a team together and identify risks. And if you have risks that are out in the red, you want to try and put some mitigation planning behind those.
What is an example of risk? I mean, is it just the equipment not working, or the risk of the equipment that you acquire could hurt somebody?
And I think it could be any of those. And I'm not really on the hardware side, so that's where I need input from you guys. But
Okay.
let's say you're going out to procurement for hardware that's cutting edge, brand new, and it's unknown.
Right.
So a risk might be you don't really know this hardware very well. So your risk could be anywhere from failure to not operating properly. So I think on the hardware, I'd have to rely on folks that have done that before. From a services side, my risk could be the person providing the services, their experience level. It could be the territory in which I'm trying to gather the data from, could have different risks. So it's really, you'd have to get a team together and kind of talk about those.
I think that'd be interesting because, like, if you're buying a computer, the risk is that if you load it up with data and it fails, then what happens if all the data is gone? In this case, you could be doing a job all day and it fails, that it doesn't store the data. But at the same time, you have, I think, another level of risk, and that is if the equipment fails and slams into somebody's house.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think as you go into these projects, I think just talking about what are the risks, and then
Yeah, that's good.
if the failure is going to cause into the side of a house, or if you're flying over a schoolyard, I doubt that's what happened, but that's just where I thought, and I don't know if we need to provide
Right.
mitigation templates, they're all out there, but it's just I thought something we'd put out there to be available.
Yeah, it's good thinking on that. That's interesting.
I mean, we could get into a number of risks that are almost standard per project, right? I mean, so you have a risk that a drone could fall on someone's house. Well, you have a risk a plane could fall on someone's house too.
Yeah.
And so, but I think one that maybe an example that's a little more common to the state, Steve, is let's say that we purchase a service from someone, and they give us, let's say that service is based on an hourly contract, and they give us an estimate of 100 hours for a job, and then come back and say, actually, it took me 300 hours. You triggered your risk, and that
Right.
you budgeted for 100, and they're coming back with 300. Now you have a problem.
Well, I'm curious I know with county contracts, and I'm just wondering from a state level, is the risk mitigated by a bond? I mean,
Could be.
a lot of the risk on a construction project is if the guy can't get it done and disappears, then the risk has been mitigated by the bond that he's had to put up. In this case, I don't know I hate to see it go to that for such a small purchase amount. But a lot of times you could evaluate the level of risk by reviews of the product. Because I'm looking more at the product than anything else, because you got to, as long as the guy is certified with the FAA, he knows what he's doing, and he's supposed to be doing a lot of stuff that mitigates the risk. But if the reviews of the product are negative, then it's out of his hands. So I don't know. It's just stuff to think about, I guess.
Yeah, what if
the risk mitigation could be that you have a payment strategy where you don't pay until the successful completion.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
And I just noticed my little grid is off. I got to move that bottom one over to the right one. But the other thing is you could talk about risk of hardware failure, and then when you go to do your procurement, you could put requirements for certain type of hardware, certain testing requirements that have passed or something like that. I just don't know that hardware field enough. So.
This is Mike. I think the important part here is that we take the time to think about, understand, and assess the risk. It's less about being real prescriptive with some structured document, and more that regardless of the magnitude of the project, we've thought about the risk, we've assessed it, understood it, and are willing to accept it. going forward. I think to me, that's the important part. I don't want to get so hung up on the details that we lose sight of the importance of just assessing risk.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
And this is Jen. We have, we put our risk analysis in our missions, not in our procurement side. So before each mission, we do a risk analysis.
So you could just refer to that then, yeah.
Yeah. Gordy, can you go back up a little bit to your state procurement side there? You know, I kind of like what you proposed there. The one thing I see missing that I know our aviation mentioned is the sole source and what.
Oh, yeah, I took that off, yeah.
Because at least for aviation, sometimes, you know, if they're looking for parts for one of our planes, well, they really only have one company that they can go to, and that's the manufacturer of the plane. Sometimes they can have a remanufactured part option, but he said, you know, they told me generally their abilities, their options can be pretty limited in that case. And so then it may be a single source is a simple cost benefit. I don't know, or maybe it still follows the same dollar figure on that. But if you don't have an option of anybody but one vendor, you're kind of stuck in that sense.
You know, I wonder if your sole source would follow the same numbers. If you sole source a services over 25, you should probably have some kind of project plan, maybe.
Yeah, it could be that it follows the same, recommend the same numbers, and it's, yeah.
Ray, this is Mike. I just want to add something that I think is important for this conversation. Gordy and we work on this from aligning it with procurement, but if you go back to the audit recommends a cost benefit before procurement. It doesn't necessarily mean the cost benefit analysis is part of the procurement. It means that you've gone through that exercise before you begin procurement. So there's a distinction there, and I want to point that out because this is something the audit identified as needing to be done before you begin the procurement. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. And I think what we're pointing to here is that what type of cost benefit analysis is appropriate if we're going to actually have two flavors, the simple one, so that we don't have overkill on a small purchase, but then the more comprehensive one for larger ones, what's appropriate there so that we actually have a true cost benefit analysis, or at least an appropriately scoped one.
This is Jen again. So the scenario, like right now we're getting ready to spend $1,500 on batteries for a particular UAS that we already have. So with that, if an agency did that, are they still having to go through even a cost benefit analysis in this scenario?
I think it's just very simple and probably informal. I mean, it depends on then your internal process requirements. I mean, for me, if I'm going to spend like that much money, I just have to, probably it's an email, if even that. So it just, you're probably thinking about the same thing. Why do I need batteries? Well, I need because of this, so I'm going to buy them, and I understand the cost and what I should pay. So you've kind of done that. It's just informal, and I don't know. It depends on your internal processes, how much documentation is needed.
This is Steve. Wouldn't that be covered just in the procurement policy, though?
Yeah.
I mean, you just have an addendum to it or something that says that this is a repeat purchase, like batteries. It's a great example.
Yeah.
There's a lot of times only one place you can get them. And so if you've already made the decision to buy the equipment and you need to buy new propellers or new batteries or whatever, then that would just be an exemption from the full-blown return on investment type of stuff.
And maybe under that 5,000, we put another statement that says follow internal.
Yeah.
Or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, that's where we had, at least in the executive order, currently is under 1,000. There isn't a necessary cost benefit analysis.
Oh.
And then in Jen's example, it kind of comes down to,
right.
She's buying, multiple batteries that total 1,500. Each one is less. Does she need to do one or not? And having a simple one makes it easy. But there's another category of the state that I think we haven't quite covered, and that's under maintenance. And certain maintenance purchases, I don't believe follow these limitations. If you're doing maintenance on an existing piece of hardware, like a helicopter, I don't think you have to do a limited solicitation to get maintenance on that. Mike, do you know anything more along those lines, or maybe Dwayne?
I don't, Craig.
I think they gave an example of a propeller as that they can just go purchase that for their device because it's categorized as maintenance. So maybe we double check on that, but that might, batteries and those things could easily fall under that kind of a category. Because what we don't want to do is just create red tape for,
Right.
Exactly.
Um,
Now, Craig, I don't know, on the maintenance side, you may have a piece of equipment that's of a certain age that you may do a cost benefit analysis fixing versus buying new too, I suppose.
Yeah, internally, and maybe there is that, is this a replacement or is this a new purchase? New purchases would be more likely to have a cost benefit analysis desired than a replacement purchase. Because ideally the replacement purchase is already been calculated out as the cost benefit when you first stood up the device, and now all you're doing is replacing it to keep it in service or modern or whatever your internal operations are on that.
So the other thing I did, just to show you quickly, Jen provided some input, so I tried to put it into the here. Just more description on what you should be putting in the business need and options.
Yeah, I took this wording from UM's sole source and limited solicitation documents. Just figured if you had to do that anyways, you might as well put in the same wording, then you can use it in both documents.
Yep.
That looks good.
Yeah, I kind of liked it when I looked at it on the site beforehand.
So that's the parts that I kind of looked up.
Okay. Well, that sounds pretty good. Any other thoughts on the one thing that he identified that was probably a little different was the what type of cost benefit analysis for the type of purchase up to 50,000. Any comments on that as a delineation between simple and more complex, or ways of determining which to use as a recommendation point?
This is Mike. I guess some of this is going to be difficult to tie to a number, to a dollar amount. And I'll go back and keep referencing the audit. And when I read the audit, it's more about investing in kind of the unknown, the uncertainty of a new technology, and that we've done our homework. And I think that whoever's charged with making that investment has to have some flexibility to develop a cost benefit that makes sense, that assesses the risk, looks at the pros, cons, and weighs those and can document them. I think that's what the audit wants done. So as long as we have a way to be flexible to apply whatever level is appropriate, if you have $10,000 worth of batteries or a significant investment in something that you already own and have proven, that cost benefit analysis is simple. But you might spend $5,000 on something that is a high risk technology, and you might want to put a little more thought into it. So I just want to get that out there. I think we have to be flexible.
Yeah. Gordy, I don't remember what you guys had for the more comprehensive one. So, I mean, it could be that we say that at the minimum, the items listed in the simple analysis need to be met. And for more higher risk or larger purchases, an organization, entity, department may choose to engage with a more comprehensive cost business analysis, such as, and give the example. Is that what you're thinking, Mike?
Yeah.
Yeah, and if we were to go into, let's say, a services contract at 25, 30,000 or more, my internal processes would lead me down that I'm gonna probably do a project management plan, engage some kind of a contract, our procurement person would probably be involved in the contract management. So my internal processes are gonna guide me to a certain extent of how I'm gonna manage a higher risk or higher cost procurement.
Right, and so that, that makes sense for DOR, and then, but for DNRC, if it's on a fire or some other type of initiative, that ends up being a very low cost
Mm-hmm.
alternative, and so it's a much faster process for them. So I think that is where Mike's talking about the flexibility
Yeah.
for the program, and that kind of ties in with where I think we're going to discuss here with the centralized oversight. And it gets a little sticky because the departments have the budget authorization and have to make the determination on the appropriate use of those funds. And so how much of regulation do we try to put in, or authority does another entity have over an agency, and how they use those funds do we put in? We have to be a little careful on that as well. So I think of the term there is centralized oversight, and that may or may not be a matter of being able to actually approve and deny a particular purchase, because Department of Transportation doesn't have authority over DNRC's budget. And so how we work that out, we'll have to be a little careful on, and that may apply here as well with the cost benefit analysis too.
I think so, but I also think that the way they've defined oversight in the audit is wrapped around operational policy and reporting. I mean, those are two of the big facets of the audit, that somebody has a handle on what our UAV environment looks like, how many we have, what we're using it for, and that we're all following some consistent policy and procedure for the use of them from a data privacy perspective and FAA perspective, all those other things we have to comply with. So I don't think the intent when I read it was to get into, no, Craig, you can't have that thing. And I don't think Dwayne, who's going to talk here in a little bit, would want to pursue that end of it. But if it's the oversight from what are we doing with them and reporting back to the legislature, I think that was more what they were looking at.
Yeah, and that was, along the lines of my comment, is we want to make sure it doesn't go to a point where we're doing that, because then we're probably doing something that isn't as is not as easily implemented by the departments. All right, any other thoughts or comments on the procurement piece? I think the next, I think then, are we still liking the thought of the procurement pieces being kind of divided into the three different
Yeah,
categories?
that sounds good.
Framework and software, or the IT piece, and then or the software, IT and software, and then the data.
Yeah, I agree.
So what we might want to do is start fleshing out something that explains that, and is referencing state procurement laws still apply to these, and where our recommendation would be, who has to weigh in on that, whether it's the agency itself with their authority under state procurement, or whether an IT piece needs to, and what piece would have to go to SITSD for approval, or under what conditions that would have to be obtained. And then fleshing out a little bit more what Gordy showed here, I think. Any other thoughts or recommendations on that? All right, so I guess I would recommend that be our next step, is to continue to flesh out that procurement guidance recommendation for state agencies on procuring. So they know what the path is and who they have to talk to, whether it's internal or external on moving forward. James, I saw your comment on the team site about MCA 181401. I'd like to chat a bit about that, but I want to make sure we have a discussion with Dwayne. So let's move to the centralized oversight, and then if we have time, we'll come back to that. If not, we can try it on the next meeting. Does that sound good?
Yep.
All right, so we had talked last meeting a bit about the centralized oversight piece, and one of the options was the Department of Transportation being that agency entity. I'm going to share my screen on I've come up with 4 different potential scenarios of what this would look like, and this is one of them. And then we can talk about the other options or see if there's others that we need to consider. I'm going to share my screen here. There we go. And let's see if I can zoom in on these 4. I don't know if this works for other folks too or not. That's a little bit high. So the centralized oversight options would be a single agency lead, which is the Department of Transportation discussion we're about to have. Other agencies would report and submit their meeting those requirements to that single agency, and they would be kind of collecting and assimilating that on behalf of the state. Or more of a department with operations, have autonomy of operations and reporting, and they aren't reporting to a single lead, or maybe they do have to submit those annually to somebody, and who would that be? And maybe those two are kind of blended. We could always recommend that the governor's office appoint someone to lead on this if it's not appropriate to have it in an existing department. Or the last one would be a formation of a council to lead, similar to MLEAC, and we can take a look at their structure here in a little bit if we want, so that there's a council that maintains more the accountability of the departments on there following the FAA regulations and guidelines. That gives a public transparency piece, which can help meet the citizen interaction piece and an oversight of operations as well, and that could also be another option for us. So Mike, I'm going to turn it to you and Dwayne to chat a little bit about what that would look like if a department such as transportation were to participate in that, what they would envision that would or wouldn't look like.
Okay, I'm gonna introduce Dwayne again. Dwayne, as I said, is our chief engineer, and not all, but most of the drone UAV, UAS work at MDT has been done under Dwayne's direction in the engineering division. Our maintenance division is getting geared up to do have some activity as well. But Dwayne is the guy that can explain it, as well as talk about his request that's in MDT's internal budget process right now, and what his hope and plan is for that. So Dwayne, I will turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Mike. Trey and everybody else, welcome. Thank you. So just to kind of cut to the chase, we keep talking drones, UAS, but just to make sure we're all clear, it's growing. It's bigger than just UAS or UAV. MDT has recently secured 2 boats now. We do a fair amount of scour analysis and surveying of river bottoms for flood analysis, FEMA requirements, you name it. So the program is really growing. I know, with drones or UAVs, we still have the FAA issues, but like I said, it's expanding quite a bit, and nobody knows where it's going to be in 5-10 years. With that, we are really getting challenged to keep adding other duties as assigned on the staff. So I have submitted, at least to our agency, it should be going to the governor's office here with all the other EPPs, but I have submitted a budget request to acquire 3 additional FTE for the agency to set up a drone program, at least for the agency. I hadn't, to be honest with you, the audit had kind of fallen off my radar, so I hadn't really thought about it much. My plan was not to be the czar for the state, being a smart aleck there. I have no plans to be the czar for the state of Montana for drones, but more to get control of what MDT is doing. Sorry. along that same lines, we are actually doing a virtual peer exchange with a number of states relative to public involvement and virtual public involvement. And one of the states that is attending is actually Washington State. And I don't know any if you guys have ever met Kurt Stiles. He works for Washington State DOT, and he runs their remote sensing program, which includes not only their UAVs, but also their helicopters and their planes for photogrammetry. They're actually fairly unique setup in the way that they've done it. Their program isn't actually part of the DOT. They are a proprietary program that actually has to be competitive with the private sector. So it's a unique concept. I'm not saying I want to go there, but I definitely want to hear more about it and see how it works. But kind of getting back to where we're at, my plan is to set up a UAV drone remote sensing program within the agency. I don't know if that will stay under my division or if it'll move maybe to ISD or some other division, or even be assigned in underneath the director's office. I'm not sure where it's going to end up landing. But I would offer up that if I'm successful in getting at least one, if not three, all three of the FTE, MDT would be more than happy to kind of help out, spearhead, potentially become the agency that takes the lead on it. Trey, I totally hear your concerns, and I'm sure others within other state agencies. I have no intent of telling you all what you're going to do any more than I want you all telling me what I'm going to do in my program. So I see it more as kind of a coordinator, a facilitator, and somebody that's responding either to the governor's office or to the legislature on behalf of the agencies. But again, my vision would be similar to what Mike was saying, is we're here to facilitate and help coordinate. We are not here to tell you guys what you're going to do or not going to do. But with that, we've all been in state government for many years. I cannot speak for what this next administration is going to do, nor the one after that, nor the various directors that we're all going to probably get new here in the next 6 months. So with that, I'll shut up and see if you guys have any questions or go wherever you guys want to go. Thank you.
Thanks, Dwayne. So 3 FTE is what you're thinking you need for a program with internally. That's helpful, just to try to get some kind of concept of the scope of what's required here. If there was some facilitation, coordination of activities of all the departments, I could see that would potentially put a bit more workload into a program like that.
To help you with that, Trey, one of the things we're looking at is not only the individuals operating the drones, but reducing the data and also helping produce such things as visual representations of our projects and those kind of things.
Yeah.
It's a little more than just, the drone and the data information there.
So it's creating the mosaics and things that would be available for the public or somebody else for use, you're saying, processing of the data?
Absolutely, yep.
Yeah. Questions for Dwayne on some of what he said or anything else that he didn't say?
So with this is Steve. I'm just curious with 3 FTEs that you're considering. I mean, how many UASs are you dealing with if you do that? I mean, I don't understand. I'm not clear as to what those FTEs are doing. Are they pilots, or are they kind of just watching over the program with the MDT, or what exactly is how's it set up?
It's not set up yet. Right now, it's very diversified. As Mike said, maintenance is looking at going in and getting their own drones. Right now, we have 5 UASs and 2 boats. The plan, my concept of it would be that basically these would be the pilots and the predominant users of the equipment. And keep in mind, they're traveling all the way from Troy all the way down to Ekalaka. at times, but we're literally deploying them every day almost, it seems
Huh.
like.
Okay. Are they fixed wing and rotor or just multi-rotor?
Everything we have so far is multi-rotor,
Okay, thanks.
but we're using them from everything from obviously surveying. We're using them on projects to survey topsoil. We actually experimented the other day. One of the issues we have is trying to find septic drain fields when we acquire property. We have an infrared drone right now, and we're actually experimenting with it to detect the heat difference due to a drain field. So, and like I said earlier, we have no idea where this technology is going in the next 3 to 5, 10 years.
All right. Great,
But-
thanks.
Dwayne, this is Mike, and I don't, tell me if I'm out of line here, but I thought part of the additional FTE would help with I would call it the administration of the program, from, the policy, the operational procedure perspective, and some of those things, at least from an MDT perspective. I know you didn't anticipate an enterprise-wide approach, but wasn't some of that FTE to help with sort of the programmatic approach to the program?
Yes, Mike, you're correct. And sorry, I failed to mention that, but yes, they would manage the program for the agency, including collecting any and all data, as well as setting and maintaining any and all policies.
So they're not actually doing the flying themselves. The programs are still doing the flying. They're just managing and overseeing the operations to ensure the department's following FAA guidelines, coordinating on the data collection and dissemination and such.
And maybe I'm not being very clear here, sorry. I actually see them as doing both. I don't see policy management or the document management as a full-time job. But you combine it with actually performing the flights, reducing the data, producing some of the visualizations. I do see them doing all three of those.
Okay. So kind of a centralization of the UAS operations in the department, or would you still let some of the programs do some of their own flying?
We would set up a training program so that some of the programs still could continue to do it within their program, but it wouldn't be it. My big concern is it's easy to go get certified. It's a little more difficult to do it safely and effectively. And that's my big concern, is getting everybody out there licensed and then just handing the drones over to anybody that is licensed.
Well, and this is Steve. That brings up kind of a question I had when, and I appreciate what you're doing in your program, and I concur that the goal wouldn't be to, if let's just say MDT did the statewide thing and was the facilitator or whatever, but I think there's some expectation, I think, and Craig can straighten me out on this, with what the legislative committee has put together and then the governor activated, was that it seems like, I hate to go in this direction, but it seems necessary that this centralized office, there needs to be some sort of component in that entire thing that would indeed say that DEQ or MDT or whoever, that, hey, you've got 2 pilots that aren't current and they can't fly right now. Or do you just send out a notice to DEQ that says you've got 2 pilots that can't fly, and let DEQ deal with it? So there'd be somebody kind of like you, Dwayne, in every one of those departments, which there isn't, that I don't think they're as advanced as MDT, it doesn't sound like, but there'd have to be some place that says, you haven't done any maintenance on this equipment for 3 years, and you better figure this out. Or that what Jen brought up a week ago, you haven't seen it, Dwayne, but it's a great check sheet as to, do you know how to fly? These are the things that you should have done. Well, okay, so if you have a centralized office that really has to have a degree of control over those other departments, so that he says, look, you've got 2 pilots that have never been in the air. They've got their FAA Part 107, but yeah, they're clueless as that. Or worst case, they're really good multi-rotor, and now all of a sudden the department acquires a fixed wing, and they've never touched a fixed wing. So there needs to be some assurance there, and that all goes back to the risk management. And And that's the entire reason for half of this, is that there is some assurance to the public and to the legislature and to the department heads that the equipment that's being acquired, that the risk has been minimized because they know what they're doing, but also you have pilots that are qualified. So, I mean, I've thrown a lot out there, but it's the biggest question is, do you set up a centralized office with some authority, or is it just mainly just a processor of keeper of the books of the records, and maybe send out notifications as according to our records, you got 2 pilots that don't have Part 107 current. So I don't know, that's just a lot to say, but.
Throw my 2 cents out there, but others by all means chime in. I think with the way that state government is organized, I think that position could notify others if they have issues such as lapsing certification. But with each of us being under our own director,
Right.
I'm challenged to see how one agency could have authority over another agency.
Well,
Yeah.
and let me add one more thing, Dwayne, that on top of all of this, then some of the agencies are not cabinet agencies, the Department of Justice. I mean, that's under the AG, and that's an elected official that sits in the executive office essentially. And so it becomes even more complex because MDT, unless they had an MOU or something, is not going to have any kind of authority or anything on those offices.
Right. Jen, were you going to say something?
Yeah, Dwayne, I was just wondering, are you operating solely under Part 107, or have you looked into getting COAs too?
And you're getting technical on me. I believe all of ours are operating under 107s as far as I know.
Okay, thanks.
You know, this I'm just thinking about, there's a fair amount of work to define what the role of that oversight really means. The audit is not too specific. It's fairly general. And I think that we either need to define what we think oversight means based on the audit recommendation specifically, and either present that to somebody to say, yep, that's what we meant, or assign that to whoever gets this assignment of statewide oversight, and let them then define that, where those boundaries are. Because there's a lot of different areas where you could get into of, some of the things you guys talked about, annual verification that people are current, the training is current, the equipment is safe. There's a lot of things that they could do, and it's just not crystal clear to me exactly where those boundaries are, and that should be defined.
Good point.
Yeah, I guess to add to that, which is a very good point, is coming back to this question. If the state agencies are operating under Part 107, that's a little different than if they operate as public entities, in which case a lot of this has to be defined centrally to some extent. How that COA, is it a COA for the state? Is it a COA for an agency only? And so then only that agency can fly under it, and then they're going to have their own requirements that they have to keep current with, including keeping track of pilots for the FAA and all the reporting back to the FAA. So to some extent, I guess it's a question of how the state wants to proceed with their operations too.
That's a good point, Jen. So based on your experience with that, just off the cuff, what would you recommend how the state approach that?
There's actually, I just got a link the other day that came from a series of Department of Transportation's different states. And it was an overview of how to set up these programs and best practices. And it looks like really they recommend a centralized office that each agency then coordinates with. And this ultimately comes back to a question about these COAs. And this, Wes had brought this up too. It's easy then to get emergency COAs once you have something in place. And having every agency have access to those can be very advantageous for the state.
Centralized, out of a centralized office.
A centralized office, yes, that actually has some oversight it would be required that they'd have some oversight for the COA for each of the agencies. So some kind of authority would have to be granted, and that could come out of a series of MOUs.
Yeah. Just making a note on that. I was gonna say on that. So at the very base level, having a centralized group, even if I think more towards what Dwayne was commenting on of what they could possibly handle on the coordination, these agencies, all the agencies that operate, would have to have some place that they're submitting their post-flight checklist, or at least the assertion that they are doing that and maintaining that, and have them ready to provide if, for example, the legislature requests a copy. And the obvious one is the cost benefit analysis. So what do we do with those, and who approves them? Is that internally approved and moving forward? Because based on the fact that that was named out there, they're going to ask for that, and they want to see them for possibly every utilization or every device, or at least for a particular department. So is it up to the department to make sure that they have their ducks in a row in that, or do we have that centralized organization? And then what do we do, as I think Steve was kind of alluding to, when a department is found to be deficient on something and they don't have their ducks in a row, or documents or pilots or certifications lapsed or something, then who weighs in on what's happening there? And generally in state government, then pressure is leaned on the director of that department to, hey, you better get your people in line because they're not operating and putting the state at risk, or operating legally, and how that operates there. But it could easily go to further types of oversight, and what Jen just brought up is an advantage there as well. Any other comments on that right off the bat while I take a breath?
This is Mike. I guess just my gut tells me it's up to the agency to be able to produce it if asked, that we develop the guidance that says, here's some general guidelines for a cost benefit analysis, and leave it in the agency's hands to be responsible for it. I mean, I compare it to the cost benefit analysis we might put together to invest in some other new technology. If we're obligated to do that, it's up to us to save it and produce it if asked in an audit. And I wouldn't want to try to centralize a bunch of documentation. I think that would be messy. But the other part you talked about, Cray, with regard to certifications and some of that might be something that a different division at MDT and our aeronautics division might be able to. And I say might because that division has very limited resources, people-wise, and funding, and their funding is different, and it's a little bit complicated, but they don't have the latitude to take on a lot. But it might be something that we could involve them with from the systems they have to track aircraft and pilot licenses, and some of that might be able to be managed within the existing systems that we have. We just have to start talking about the specifics of what we want to keep and track and manage.
I might throw out one little thing here, but it seems to me that if an agency is going to, or someone within the agency wants to acquire a UAS of some sort, that person probably kind of should know kind of that industry, that technology, because they're going to be using it because they want to buy it, and that it's going to be up to them to do the cost benefit. Now, analyzing the cost benefit by the higher ups, maybe that's more of a challenge because they don't know that industry. But the person that puts together the procurement stuff and the cost benefit analysis, they're probably going to be able to do a pretty good job. But then my confusion is, and I'll throw this to Jen, is that I'm not sure we can talk about all these agencies that are cabinet level, et cetera, but then I don't know how, if you have any thoughts on the university side, when you have all these universities that I guess each one of the universities would have some obligation to go through the same exercise as the state agencies. And then you're dealing politics, because now you're bringing the Board of Regents into this thing, and maybe they don't want to play along with this thing. So I don't know. It's advantage of just being a citizen, and I don't have to deal with any
Get that poking us the tough question.
of this.
Steve, I think you bring up a good point. On some level, you can see the university system sort of a test case here, where each
Yeah.
campus has their own policies.
Yep.
And you can already tell, like certain campuses is a little bit easier to fly than other campuses, and
Gee, I didn't know that.
so that does create some issues. And we've started discussions if we should centralize things for MUS, just because of this barrier that's appearing between different schools and how they operate. So it's still an open question, and I think, at least from what I've seen in the literature, it looks like centralizing as best you can is really the way to go. Then it takes away any of the, at least under the universities, that certain universities have advantages because just their policies aren't as strict. And ultimately, I think this comes down to just interpreting what we're getting from the FAA and following those regulations, and having everybody buy in that that's what we should be doing. So and I am curious, actually, Cray, the idea of a committee for central oversight, because that might be nice if different agencies, it's centralized, but each agency isn't being told what to do. They have some buy-in.
Yeah, thanks, Jen, because I wanted to just point people to this, and we'll probably pick this discussion up again. So the best example I know of off the top of my head is what's called the Emily Act, the Montana Land Information Advisory Council. This is I guess you call it a consortium of people, but public and private, that meet together, I want to say quarterly. And they're administratively attached to the state library for this particular council, and is required, as it says here, by statute, advises the state librarian, the state library commission on issues related to land information, on the priorities, how funds are used, the data layers to be developed, development and management of the grant process that they do to further local communities and their development of land information projects there. It's heavily related and tied in with their GIS systems. Identify, evaluate, prioritize requests received from state agencies, local governments, tribal entities, development and maintenance of services relating to GIS and land information, promoting coordination of programs, policies, technologies, and resources to maximize efficiencies of efforts, facilitate documentation, distribution, exchange of data, land information, and advocating on the development of policy standards and guidelines for land information for the state of Montana. One of the big things I could see as an opportunity, and I don't know if any of you saw I think it was in Government Technology, they had an article this week that came out, and it highlighted Chula Vista and their program for UAV use. And they really were talking about the advantage that they found of making sure your public citizens are very informed, and the program you operate is very transparent on what you do with your operations, where you're doing that, and the ability for people to go and review that data. And so something like this, in my mind, would help meet that next thing that we have to discuss, is that citizen interaction piece, and how do we have that transparency with the citizens. And the one disadvantage of having it just be internal to departments, besides the fact that we have the challenge of those departments that don't necessarily report, like Steve pointed out, Department of Justice, but also now you have government watching over government. That doesn't necessarily always encourage trust from the citizenry that they're doing a good job regulating themselves. This would give more transparency to people on making sure that everyone is following those guidelines, mitigating risk, doing true good cost benefit analysis on their programs, and also information and then helping on the data side of it. Where is that data going to be centralized and available to the public to be able to utilize? Because in many ways, this is taxpayer dollars that are funding some of these programs, and the resources of that is to be used on the benefit of the citizens, except for that data which, for whatever reason, cannot be shared openly because of other security or operations. So that's kind of what that model would look like, or something similar to that in my mind.
I think the model is good, and I think the land council is a great council. It's also fairly mature and it's statutorily defined, and all the rules and how the money is used and spent and generated is all in statute too. And it would take some work to get there, is all I'm saying, Cray, and some, maybe not time to do it before this upcoming session, just given that kind of work that would have to be done, but it's a good model to look at.
Yeah, and that's a good point. We have to remember what we're providing is a recommendation, right? So it could be our recommendation to deal with, to help manage the current operations, because departments are already operating on this. Initially, it may be that we organize internally under, Department of Transportation or autonomous to each department. But the recommendation is that the governor's office help establish a council to oversee this, or the legislature put this into place to manage this type of thing. Is it have that kind of longevity? Dwayne talked about where's this going in 5 years. We hypothesize using these things to look at the underwater face of dams for any damage and things at DNRC, and it's neat to find out that MDT is already kind of utilizing aquatic, because this is all about remote sensing. The drone is just a mechanism of doing remote sensing, and that technology may change, but the remote sensing aspect probably will last a little bit longer. All right, so that's another option, and that could end up, if we decide that model is really what would be best for Montana. Again, our recommendation is progress towards forming such a thing, and that may be down the road, 2 years to reach maturity, right? So that's a good point, Mike.
When you're talking about that council, Craig, I mean, that my initial reaction is that, that one thing we're talking about today is, boots on the ground, that if in 2 days there needs to be some question on acquisition of equipment or whatever, there needs to be that centralized place to do that. And the council maybe is a good thing to oversee the whole process. But I don't know if the council could be used for the centralization part of it, though. Seems like they wouldn't be available. Like the land council seems like they can only get together like once a quarter or something like that. So I like the idea of the council, but I don't know if it would work for boots on the ground type of stuff. So.
Yeah, and in that case, it probably still falls under the authority of the departments themselves, because
yeah,
in this case, the budget authority is in the departments. They're the ones making the determine if it's a good
right.
use. The council just provides a framework for how the state should be operating and reporting that data, or something along those lines.
Well, it could act like if, a crazy example, it was like a school district. The superintendent answers to the school board, and the school board is kind of like the council, just that they're elected. But they're the overseers, and they set the policy basically, and the administrator or the superintendent kind of he's on the grounds doing all this stuff every day, but the school board meets once every month or something like that.
Yeah.
Something like that, I guess.
Yeah. All right, any other closing thoughts anyone wants to make here before we wrap it up?
Just next steps, Craig, what do you want from us, and what should we be working on or thinking about for next week?
Yeah, so I think on the procurement side, continue to flesh out a document that would outline, describe the recommendation of where we're headed with that, so that we can start finalizing something along those lines would be great. On this discussion, I think people that continue to think about and put out ideas, and we talked about a couple different models here that have some pros and cons to. Some more thought and comments going into that we can continue this discussion of how this could actually work well for the state of Montana. I think if we can get some more insight on some of those aspects and what that would look like, especially across agencies, and how that works, so that we're not creating something complicated, but to provide that framework. This is one of the tough pieces of the council discussion in reality, and I knew it would be from the get-go. Is how do you do this centralized that works for all the state of Montana, and how far does that reach out to university systems and things? Where's the coordination piece with them on these to ensure that we're doing due diligence? And it may be that part of what the state auditor's office asked for is not as realistic as they may have envisioned. And we have to come to grips in reality with that what is achievable, or at least what's the 80-85% achievability. And maybe that's our recommendation, to go that direction. And if there's any other models that someone thinks of, please bring that to come forward on here.
Hey, Cray, has there been any discussion with Tim Buckfield, CIO, about his expectations of reviewing, I guess I'll just think, the procurement paths we're looking at?
I'm not sure there has been to date, Gory. And so that's certainly something we can do. I think also, and I think I mentioned this before, maybe I was even supposed to do it. It would be kind of nice to have state procurement weigh in as well, and make sure that they're all good with what we're proposing here, and see if any of them actually, I can try pulling together a meeting with those two. I don't know, is there someone on the data piece that we should be pulling in?
Yeah, I don't know if that's something you want a little subgroup to do, or have them come to one of these meetings, however.
Yeah, I think a subgroup would be good, to just make sure that there's not something we're not thinking of. Do you want to pull that together, Gordy? And
I sure could. I mean, I just was kind of pulling together the policy that sets up the ITPR, the IT procurement request process, and some of the definitions. So yeah, I pull a little group together and at least have an initial discussion.
Okay, that'd be great. And feel free to invite me to that as well.
Okay.
So I know where we're headed with that one. If there's any things that are gonna possibly derail what we're talking about. Alrighty. Does that give us, I don't know that we have enough direction on the oversight piece to take more action. I think we still need to collect more information and to vet some ideas on what will and won't work. Any other thoughts on the next steps on that one? Please feel free here. All right. So before we close, any public comment? I'm not sure we have any public people on the line. Are there still? We dropped a few because of other meetings. All right, no public comment. All right, we'll adjourn until next week. Really appreciate the discussion and the work people are doing. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Craig.
Thank you.